This was the moment I realized I couldn't reach my planned landing area on my hang glider. And I couldn't even make it to the highway to get picked up. Hang gliders don't have a motor to get us out of these kinds of situations. So where could I land? From here, I ended up having less than 4 minutes until I was on the ground, and I still had to find a safe landing spot. But let's go back a bit and see how I even ended up here in the first place. This was RJ's and my first ever trip to the Owens Valley, one of the most famous places to fly hang gliders in the world. It's known for crazy turbulence and even flipping hang gliders, but also for the potential to get flights over 100 miles. So it's a very intimidating yet exciting place to fly. It's also stunning. So it's no surprise it's drawn pilots for decades. We actually tried to go last September, but there was a big fire. So we waited for the new season to start this year on Memorial Day weekend. The Owens Valley is difficult even from launch, which is at 9,200 feet high and is steep with light winds. Again, we don't have a motor, so we get the glider flying just by running. So you want a strong run to get in the air safely. We did our first flight on Friday, and it's the Owens, so you know it was exciting. When we arrived at launch in the morning, the clouds were already growing behind the mountain, which indicates stormy and unsafe conditions. So we tried to set up and take off quickly. It took me some extra time to set up my oxygen system in my harness. We want that when we're flying above 13,000 feet, which is common in the Owens. As a result, I launched last of the 4 pilots in our group. The wind was actually pretty good when we arrived, but it was getting lighter. I was also feeling pretty nervous about flying with a knee injury, so it took me a while to go.
I'll probably go that way, away from the rain.
Meanwhile, the clouds were only getting closer, so I either had to launch quickly and get out to the valley or break down to avoid the risky weather entirely. I finally launched.
Where?
But during my run, my hand somehow slipped and I let go of the glider entirely. You actually can't even really tell from the outside view on the other side, besides that my nose goes up a little bit. I didn't have any new equipment, no new gloves, nothing, so I felt really thankful that my launch was still fine. Still, that's something I never want to repeat. Gravity is always pulling hang gliders down to the ground, and since we don't have a motor, we stay up and get these long flights by finding warm, rising air, called thermals. Thermals are invisible, like all air, but I flew to a well-known thermal spot and was able to gain a little altitude. But after just 5 turns, I started getting hit in the face by what felt like hail, and I knew I had to get out of there. I immediately turned my glider towards the valley and started gliding out, away from the storm clouds. The plan was to land at the regular landing zone called Tracy's LZ after our friend Tracy, who started landing there. My goal, though, was to do a mini cross-country flight to Lone Pine Airport. It's an uncontrolled airport and we have permission to land by the old sailplane runway. Even though I started at barely above launch level, I felt I could probably make the almost 9-mile glide to the airport. I still had Tracy's or another LZ called Lake Diaz as bailout options if I started getting a little low.
No, I don't think I can make the airport on the line here at Lake Diaz.
In the past, I would have just gone straight to Tracy's. So on this day, I was really proud of myself for trying to go to the farther LZ and for giving myself some safe landing options along the way. On my way, I hit some lift just before Lake Diaz, and I knew I'd make it to the airport. That was super exciting as that was my goal on this flight. Then I was on my way to Lone Pine Airport.
Hey, above the airport, do a little thermaling over there. I'll fly around until I land.
The airport LZ was great, with lots of space and windsocks. I felt super happy with my landing at 3,600 feet. I videoed RJ's landing when he came in. And it was nice to break down with all of our friends.
Concrete to break down on, cars right here.
It was only a 35-minute flight, but to me, it felt like a great intro to flying in the Owens. It did make me feel maybe a little too confident about reaching the airport, which did become an issue in my second flight. The weather got worse and worse over the next few hours, so I was really glad we chose to land when we did. Since we landed early, RJ and I spent the rest of the day driving north. We were checking out LZs up the valley, so we'd be more prepared to try to do a big cross-country flight, since it's always safer if you're familiar with your landing options. Ironically, I didn't end up using any of the designated LZs in my second flight, but we'll get to that. The next morning, we went up a little bit earlier in case it overdeveloped again. Launch was full of hang gliders for the holiday weekend. People are always talking about hang glider numbers declining, so it's always nice to fly with so many others. The wind was very light on launch, so everyone was just waiting for cycles to make their launch run a little bit easier and safer. I got in line early and was maybe the 5th or so pilot to launch. I did a full hang check, making sure I was hooked in correctly and everything was good with my harness, but I also always check my hook in just prior to launching to make absolutely sure I'm attached to the glider. After getting my wings balanced and feeling the cycle, I went for it. I went straight to the same house thermal spot as the day before. It was a bumpier day, and I got a big wire slap, which I didn't get on camera, but looks like this. It's not a bad thing, but it does make the flying a little more exciting. I climbed above launch and had a lot of fun flying with more people today. Soon, I started heading up the range. The Owens Valley is well known for strong thermals and climbs up to our legal limit of 18,000 feet. But that was not the case this day. It was a struggle to get above 12,000 feet, and I think I only reached 13,000 feet twice. That's high for anywhere else, but not for the Owens. Even though I wasn't that high, I was still able to enjoy some absolutely incredible views. RJ and I followed some more experienced Owens pilots up the range, but I made the mistake of not sticking with them very well to try to follow their path. It's good to fly with others because the air is invisible, so it can be hard to find thermals on your own, especially on these lighter days. My biggest mistake was when they found some lift a little behind us and I didn't want to turn around because I would have been flying in the wrong direction. So I didn't turn around to go back for it until I was too low to make use of it. I think that was my biggest error that led me to landing early on this flight. I followed RJ, but I was tired and dehydrated from the high altitude the last couple of days. I live at sea level and I was struggling. I was getting low, and with the mountains being pretty far from the valley in that part of the range, I decided to leave when I hit 11,000 feet to give me enough altitude to make the glide out. That seemed like a pretty conservative height, since the more experienced pilots I'd asked recommended 10,000 feet or even 9,000 feet to reach the airport. I found some lift and tried to thermal, but I soon dipped below my 11,000 foot limit and I started my glide out.
Got down to 11, trying to make the airport. I don't know if I will. I might have to land.
We don't have motors, so we have to try to maximize our glide in other ways. My big mistake on this glide was when I was hitting a lot of consistently sinking air, I didn't even try to find another line that might have been more buoyant. I did eventually aim for areas that might have lift, and I even found some. But circling in that lift ended up drifting me downwind even farther from the airport. My ground speed was so slow, and my phone showed a 20 mile per hour or so crosswind from the southeast, so I knew I'd be fighting a strong headwind to get back toward the airport. I was just hoping I'd find stronger lift somewhere and somehow be able to do it. But as I got closer, I realized my chances of reaching the airport were low and getting lower. I'd already started searching for other closer landing areas near the highway that looked flat and clear of obstacles. At this point, I still thought I'd make it to the highway, though I knew I'd likely be pretty low. I wasn't thinking much about trying to land on my side of the hills, as besides maybe trying to land on the road, the options looked pretty terrible. The whole time, I was in radio contact with our friend Marshall. He lives nearby and came up to watch us launch and very kindly agreed to drive for us, to pick us up if we ended up going up the valley and bring us back to the airport where we'd parked our car. He's flown the Owens before and actually lost his glider in the river, so he's very familiar with the hazards of flying here. He was tracking my flight on Volandu, which is a free live tracking app that shows hang glider and paraglider flights in real time. Marshall asked me over the radio if I would make it over the Alabama hills. At first, I said yes, but his question made me reassess. As soon as I responded to him, I realized for the first time that I might not make it. Even if I did, I spotted some power lines right on the other side of the hills, so it might not even be a safe landing area, but I would be out of options to find somewhere else. As another problem, crossing low over the hills could put me in rotor from the strong winds, making the flying riskier. Honestly, I am really grateful to Marshall for asking me that question because I don't know when I would have realized otherwise. So now we're finally back to where we started. It is possible I could have made it over the hills, but for all those reasons, I decided I didn't want to risk it. I immediately started looking for a place to land on my side of the hills. I flew downwind to cover more ground and try to get away from all the huge rocks below. I didn't know it, but I had less than 4 minutes until I'd be on the ground. I unzipped my harness so my feet would be free for landing. I'd made the mistake of no longer looking for landing areas below me as I got closer to the hills, because I was so sure I would make it across. Now, I was pretty worried, since the area below me was full of huge boulders, slopes, and uneven terrain.
Yeah, well, it's really shitty bench right here. I probably would have crashed.
This was probably the most worried I've ever been, thinking I would crash my hang glider. But I had to put the thought out of my mind and focus. I looked at some cleared campgrounds as potential landing options, so I might at least be near people in case I crashed. But I realized they were behind the hills, which would create rotor and then wind shadow blocking the wind as I came in, making a bad landing situation even worse. I was losing altitude and needed to decide on a landing spot quickly. I hit some lift, but I was worried it would drift me even farther downwind without climbing much, so I didn't stop to turn. I'd spotted a clear area next to the road, which seemed to have small bushes and no boulders. I flew over it looking for obstacles, and it seemed like the best option I would get. I considered landing on the road, but there was a line of cars coming up along it, so I focused on the field. I turned into the wind to line up over the clearest spot. With the strong headwind, all I had to do was fly straight, and I was coming down quickly. You can see my shadow barely moving over the ground. With the cars approaching, I went a little farther out over the field. I usually have a landing checklist, which includes unzipping my harness, setting my VG to 1/4, turning on my cameras, and making sure my visor is up. But I was so focused on picking a field that I didn't go through it, which was another mistake. As a result, I didn't take off VG, and I transitioned my hands to the down tubes much later than I normally would. Finally, I dove to have as much airspeed and control on landing as I could. It was not my best touchdown, but I was thrilled.
I landed safely.
I immediately radioed to let RJ and Marshall know I'd landed safely. The headwind made it a pretty slow and easy landing, which was lucky. On the other hand, the headwind is what kept me from making it to the main landing area in the first place. So, you know. I was so happy to be safe on the ground and for my glider to be okay too.
Landed on my second flight in the Owens. Very exciting day. I was trying to get, so I started over there. I was trying to get to the airport. Couldn't even clear these hills, so had to land in the middle, which was very exciting. Safe landing, fortunately all good. And this it was interesting, it was a fun flight.
I broke down in gusty winds and texted my mom to let her know I landed. She knew right away that something wasn't right because she's that on top of things. Since I'd landed by the road, Marshall was able to find me pretty easily. Huge thanks to him again for his help. RJ landed at the airport, then drove the car to come help pick up my glider. I feel like flying in the Owens always gives good stories to tell, and our trip definitely lived up to that. So if I was trying so hard to be conservative, why did that still happen? I ended up leaving the mountains in front of Lone Pine Peak at 10,900 feet. Then I glided 6 miles to land at 4,900 feet. In the future, I'll leave even higher, especially if I notice there's a lot of wind creating strong drift. One of our friends, John, left the same area at 14,000 feet on a Sport 3 just like I was flying, and he made it to the airport fine. RJ left the same spot at 13,000 feet on his high-performance T3 glider. Thinking he had a lot of spare altitude, he took a detour, and then he ended up just barely making it to the airport. I'll also try harder to look for LZs over the area I'm flying, not just the area in front of me. I actually did do this earlier in the flight, but I stopped when I was sure I'd make it over the mountains, and then that just didn't end up happening. The altitude, dehydration, and fatigue also likely played a role. I live at sea level, so the altitude was definitely difficult for me. So I'll try to get more sleep and drink more water next time. We were so tired after those 2 flights, so we just decided to go home instead of trying to fly again. Our friends ended up getting long flights, but I feel like we made the safe decision for how we were feeling. And I feel like you can never regret a safe decision, especially in aviation. It also meant that I got to go to the beach the next day and play around at 10 feet off the ground, the complete opposite of our other flights this weekend. It was so much fun. I really needed this kind of chill flying after the weekends, but we had an absolutely amazing adventure for our first trip to the Owens. Thank you again so much to Marshall and Rob for driving, and to Hungry Joe for all of the advice. I felt really hesitant about flying in the Owens again after this experience, but we ended up going back there less than 2 months later for the July 4th holiday weekend. That actually ended up being an even more memorable flight somehow, and I hope to post it soon. Thank you for watching. See you then.